Shocking scenes in St. Louis, Missouri this week when an apparently peaceful march against the acquittal of a white police officer accused of murdering a young black man turned violent. These kinds of incidents have become depressingly familiar in the United States. Many blame President Trump's often inflammatory rhetoric. Are they right? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. We're in Washington, D.C. at the African-American Museum, which is celebrating its first anniversary this week. It took a century, 100 years to get this, a tribute to the achievements, the culture, and the history of this country's almost 40 million black people. Fittingly, it was the Obamas who opened it, along with George W. Bush, who actually signed off on the project. Now, it could have heralded the start of a new era, an end to the racist past, but it hasn't. In the last 12 months, this country has had perhaps the most divisive election ever. There's a new man in the White House, and racist violence and hate crimes are on the rise. St. Louis is just the latest in a series of violent events that have the unmistakable mark of racism or some other form of intolerance. Who can forget Charlottesville? Last month, white nationalists, neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan held what they described as their largest rally in decades to, quote, take America back. Counter-protesters turned out too. There were angry scenes, and a 20-year-old white supremacist rammed his car into the crowd and killed a 32-year-old woman. The governor declared a state of emergency and told his unwelcome guests to go home. But it's not just Charlottesville or St. Louis. The Council on American-Islamic Relations, the largest Muslim civil rights organization in the US, has found that the number of hate crimes in the first half of this year was up 91% on the same period last year. And many Americans lay the blame for this resurgence of hate firmly on the president's doorstep.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
His critics say the Trump presidency has normalized white supremacy and emboldened the bigots. All right, let's introduce our guests now. We have Daryl Johnson, who's former lead analyst for domestic terrorism at the US Department of Homeland Security. We have Day Gardner, president of the National Black Pro-Life Union. And Corey Saylor, director of the Department to Monitor and Combat Islamophobia at the Council on American-Islamic Relations. Welcome to you all. Can I start with you, Daryl? It seems from afar that virtually every week America is in the grip of protest, heavy-handed policing, and quite often it's of there's a racial tone to it. I mean, how representative of that is that of America today?
Yeah, we're definitely in a heated period of our country where our country's been divided more than ever on these racial lines. So a lot of things have played into that. I mean, we've always had kind of this far left versus far right. The far left may show up when there's economic summits or, conferences with the Republican and Democratic national conventions. But what we have, a new dynamic is the rallies on the alt-right. And so we have these two competing forces coming together in close proximity, and this has erupted into violence.
But these are political groupings, aren't they, with opposing views, right? There are those who oppose big government, for instance, those who oppose certain issues of foreign affairs and foreign policy. But what I'm noticing in America today is this kind of rise of identity politics, the politics of race, the politics of religion. I mean, would you agree?
I think that what we're seeing certainly is the tensions of several years starting to erupt sort of in ever more angry and violent cycles at this point. But we do go through these cycles. We saw it right after 9/11, around about 2010, when you had the controversy over the possible construction of an Islamic cultural center in Lower Manhattan. You also saw a lot of heated conversations about that. But now what I would say is that it tends to be more characterized by violence. And I also do want to point out to observers overseas, there's positive things happening in response to this as well. So right after the inauguration, if you watch the Women's March, I think that was really where many people found their voice again. And then when the executive order on immigration was issued, you saw airports full of people pushing back against that. And that's a very positive thing to remember. America does have two voices in this conversation.
So, Day, I mean, this comes to the nub of the issue, really, isn't it? And that is the fact that the presidency and the occupant of the White House is one who's often accused for being responsible for creating this tone of division in the country.
And of course, it's not true. The thing is that, of course, we all know that there is racism. Racism exists in this country. But the things, first of all, we're a very young country, and we're still kind of growing and still kind of getting our way around it and feeling our way through it. But
well, you're
the thing is,
a young democracy in terms of race, aren't
exactly.
you? I mean, you had, what, 200 years of slavery, then you had apartheid, effectively, didn't you, for, what, 100 years? Mm-hmm. So you haven't had that long as
we haven't had that long. And
liberal
but
democracy.
The thing is, what is happening now, as far as I'm concerned, is for the most part manufactured racism. And what I mean by that is that you have these groups, whether it's Black Lives Matter, you have the Antifa groups funded by George Soros and others. These are people who are trying to cause disruption and violence. And the thing is that when you think about the whole immigration policy, the fact that what President Trump had said was, as far as building a wall on our southern borders, he had said that people should come to this country legally. I honestly believe that people should come here legally. If they don't, then we, as he said, doesn't have a country. The other thing was the ban.
Well, what he said on the ban was he wants to implement a Muslim ban. I mean, that was very clear.
What he said
and
is
then
he
Rudy
wanted
Giuliani came out later and said that Trump approached him and said, "How do we legally implement the ban?"
Why is it that
so given that
you
have those statements, that's not a wall. That's, I want to ban Muslims. I think Islam hates us. He said he thought it was a good idea for Muslims to have ID cards, and then he goes and tries to implement it.
First of all, I think what this president is doing is what every president should do with this country, and that is to make sure that we are all safe. That's the bottom line. The thing is, the president said temporary ban. And I don't know why everybody tends to leave that one word out.
That was a hugely controversial area, was it? It still is, in fact. But it had direct repercussions on the street for Muslims in this country, insofar as there was a spike,
I didn't hear temporary
there?
when he called for his original Muslim ban. He said,
but there was a spike in terms
I'm
of
proposing a ban on Muslim immigration to this country.
Hate attacks on the streets of various cities around the country as a consequence of this controversy surrounding the Muslim ban, as it was known.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is that you also hear about, and I think that we have to point out that there is violence on both sides, or today and these days on all sides. So it's not like, one group is attacking another and the other group is sitting there turning the other cheek.
This is
That's
what
not what's happening.
you made mention
your
of.
point. I mean, we've always had, counter-protesters showing up at Klan rallies,
of course,
instigating violence there. What's different this time is the fact that we have a lot more people on the far right coming out to these rallies, which shows that they're emboldened, that they're, feel like they can come out and actually express themselves. I mean, during the Obama administration, we saw an increase in numbers at KKK and neo-Nazi rallies. Before Obama was elected, you'd be lucky if you had 8 to 10 white supremacists show up at the courthouse for a rally.
That's a very interesting point.
But now we've got hundreds of people showing up, thousands of people in Charlottesville with torches. And so that speaks to
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you think about
a
Charlottesville.
progressive environment.
You think about that. You think about with the KKK, and you think about the other groups that showed up there. And you can't get past the fact that that particular protest was organized or helped a lot by Jason Kessler, who is was a Hillary supporter, was an Obama supporter, and so that we have to be realistic and understand that a lot of this comes from the left.
So you're suggesting that a lot of what we're seeing on the streets of America today is being manufactured,
yes,
is being
indeed.
sponsored by outside
of course
interests.
Yes.
I mean, would you agree with that, or is there something organic within the United States, within society today, that is leading, that is spawning these more intense expressions of
I don't think that there's
affiliation.
a conspiracy behind this. It's basically we're in a heightened period. It started back in 2008 where the far right got agitated about the economy tanking and about an African-American president. Okay? Typically during Republican administrations, we see a dial back on the far right. We see these groups kind of appease themselves. They feel that they have someone in the White House that listens to them or whatever, and their activities go down. This Trump administration, it's just the opposite. They're emboldened. They're actually still at a heightened state. And so I think that's what makes this different. And the fact that we have, the far right fighting back or instigating the violence, that's something that's atypical. Typically, we see the anarchists, the black bloc, are the ones that are the aggressors.
All right.
Now we're seeing the far right.
Now we see it the other way. I don't see far right at all. I see the leftists, the far left, as being the instigators.
Now you got to remember
who are wearing the mask over their faces.
Right.
Who are these people? They're
no
from
one's
the left.
denying that there's violent far leftists, but the histories of these movements, okay, the far left destroy property. They break up glass on, the city streets. They burn a police car.
Occupy Wall Street.
Right. They may assault somebody during a rally by throwing something.
They injure policemen.
But the people on the opposite side have long histories of killing people, of blowing up stuff, of setting fires to
we're getting a picture.
The point that right after the election, there was an uptick in targeting of Muslims, there was an uptick in targeting of the Jewish community, there was an uptick of targeting the Hispanic community, the African-American community, pretty much every minority. Absolutely. Pretty much every minority documented it. So for this to be manufactured would require a whole lot of people in a whole lot of places all coming to the same thing and acting in the same way. Or the simpler explanation is that there was a group that felt empowered to go out and target minorities, and that's what they started doing, and that's why you see so many different incidents.
So we come back then to the hub again of this whole debate, and that is that there is a responsibility, there's a moral responsibility placed upon the shoulders of the highest officials in the land to keep people safe and not to create an environment of enablement, which seems to be what we have at the moment.
As a Muslim, I don't think the highest officials in this land right now are committed to keeping me safe. That has not been what I have seen in the numbers playing out since after the election. And what I saw on the campaign trail, I'll give you just one incident. Donald Trump, speaking at a rally, said very specifically to the audience, if anybody throws something at the stage, I can't actually quote him, but they should beat that individual up, and he would pay the legal fees. That's just one example. So we don't have a president that I think has a moral compass. I think we have a president who is transactional. He will do whatever he has to say to get through whatever goal he's trying to achieve.
If I could add to that, too, this is like the first time that I ever remember in my life that we have a president that, retweets anti-Semitic messages from hate groups, that listens to Alex Jones' InfoWars, which is a conspiracy website, a conspiracy radio show that panders to the far right. The President of the United States. And the fact that he's trying to discredit the mainstream media by calling it fake news when he himself is consuming fake news by listening to InfoWars.
So, Dave, you have to accept
you're saying panders to the far right, just like CNN panders to the far left. So the thing is, I believe in fake news, and I'm so glad the president does tweet, because it's the only way, honestly, if we're going to get any truth at all, we have to...
Okay, but Dave, the responsibility of the person in the White House and his, in this instance, officials, the responsibility, the burden upon them is to set a tone for society, isn't it? And what we're hearing, and what so many people are accusing the Trump White House of doing, is of creating this atmosphere of enablement to fuel hate speech, to, hate crimes are on the up, racial violence. How can you say that when you
think about Berkeley? What happened at Berkeley? I mean, the thing is that how is he fueling any of that stuff? I mean, we see people, young people out there with masks on, who are setting fires, who are destroying public property, destroying private property, setting things on fire, police cars, injuring people. The thing is, that's not the president. That is the other side, and we have to understand, and to what you said, that yes, if there's someone or anybody with $100 billion to spend and thinks nothing of spending money, we know that a lot of people are bussed in. I mean, when you look at Ferguson, a lot of those people who were doing all the damage didn't even live there. They were bussed in to do the damage, and then they bust out.
Okay, what is the responsibility now? What is what should be the policy then of, and I again go back to the highest elected officials in this country, what should they be doing to take the sting out of what we're seeing in cities in this country on a weekly basis?
You talk about responsibility. Responsibility starts with the public, starts with me, it starts with you, it starts with you. And I think what you're doing here right now, you're basically giving me a voice and you're giving these two gentlemen a voice. It's about, especially the media, being honest and truthful, telling the truth, and so that people hear both sides. That's not what's happening right now. I mean, the reason that the president talks about fake news is that because, I sit back and watch these shows, I'm thinking, I was at this particular place or at that particular place, I'm thinking what they said is totally untrue. Anytime I realize that, and people who are at the rallies realize that, the president sees it. So the thing is that I think responsibility starts with the people, the fact that they should respect the office. This is the most disrespected president ever. And I honestly believe that he's a real patriot. I believe he's a good man, and I think he's all about making America great again and safe again, and I want those things.
Well, the one thing President Trump did recently that I will agree with is he did sign a congressional resolution against hate. He did that last week. Okay, it's a little too late, but at least he did it, and he acknowledged it.
Now,
whether he follows it up
effect?
with actions and condoning the hate and coming out and renouncing the white supremacy like he did a few days after the Charlottesville, I think he needs to get his message straight, and it needs to be clear, and it needs to be direct. And to sit there and blame both sides for violence, yes, I don't want to sit there and condone the violence on the far left, but in comparison, when you look at it from a threat perspective, the white supremacists, the neo-Nazis, the KKK, they have a much more rich history of violence against people, killing, murder, and mayhem than the far left.
Is there a sense, perhaps, and I'm not even sure if I believe this myself, but is there a sense that because this man is not a politician and doesn't come from the political class, that he's not really aware of the significance of his words, the impact of his words?
That's the job of his staff. I mean, we have professional political staff that should be guiding him in his statements and should be writing them. I mean, another indicator we haven't even talked about is, some of the far-right agitators that he appointed to his own cabinet. Many of them are gone now, but they were there for many months, and they were there influencing the president. They had his ear.
Well, every president puts in the people that he wants to put in.
He's an entertainer, and you see him doing those kind of things all the time with the media. I've made a decision on North Korea, but I'm not going to tell you yet, which gets the media talking about everything he wants to do. But going back to the two things that have to happen. One, right after 9/11, you saw George Bush go into a mosque, and this was a moment of crisis like nothing Donald Trump has faced to this date. And Bush had the moral authority to walk into a mosque and remind America that we should all pull together. I don't expect that out of Trump, but when we're asking what should be done, absolutely he should be doing those kind of things to pull America together. But since I don't think that's going to happen, what I've been telling everybody is it's very simple for the next 4 years. We hire less lobbyists, we hire more lawyers, because that's how you're going to be interacting with the government for the next few years, and that's how you're going to make sure that the communities are defended from people who are looking to lash out at us.
But this seems to me as being perhaps the biggest challenge facing the White House in particular, the government today, and that is to try to bridge these the rifts that have always been there, as you were pointing out earlier, have always been there, but they've been allowed to come to the surface, and some are even exacerbating those rifts in society.
I think one of the most important things is for most people to get over the fact that Hillary lost. She lost, and she lost big, and she lost to a businessman, someone who is not a politician at all. He's a businessman, a very successful businessman, and the thing is that he's doing things very differently. He is draining the swamp, getting rid of the people, the career politicians. I think it's necessary. I personally am for term limits on congressional people. And the thing is that I think that that's what has to be done. I think that it's necessary for this Constitution to be everything it was supposed to be in the beginning. I think that there are a lot of people who are very set on becoming multimillionaires while they're in Congress. I'm very much against that. And I think that the president is doing exactly what needs to be done in order to take America back to where it should be.
In the meantime, Daryl, I mean, how would you characterize the situation in the U.S. today?
The president needs to come out, condemn whenever there's the next shooting, which will happen, a race-based shooting. He needs to come out immediately and condemn it, call it terrorism. To sit there and sugarcoat it and call it something else or to blame two different sides, I think is the wrong approach.
It was the ambivalence, actually, of the president's response to Charlottesville, which I think really caught the attention of the world. And that showed to us that the president wasn't at all sure. Was he with the neo-Nazis? Was he with these nationalists who had led to whose action had led to the death of one woman in Charlottesville? Or wasn't he? He wasn't sure.
How many times does this president have to come out and say, that I denounced the KKK, and then how many times does he have to say? He has said it over and over and over and over again. And the thing is that it's the one thing that the mainstream media and that the leftists, seem like they keep putting it out there. No matter how much, how many times do you keep spelling out the fact that the man is not a racist? The thing is that he is not. I think it's necessary to understand that the people who voted Donald Trump in office were not all white people. That there are large numbers of black people. I know many of them. I know many of them who have churches of 10,000, 5,000, 10,000 people in their congregation. It weren't all white people that voted Trump into office. As a matter of fact, I think he got more of the black vote than any other president had before. So the thing is, we have to understand, it's not about. The only people that are calling race seem to be people from the left who are just sore losers. Hillary didn't win.
Well, I think one thing the president can do to send a signal is when he came into power, he dialed back the Countering Violent Extremism program to focus exclusively on Muslim extremists. I think that was a mistake, and it sent another signal. It's not about whether he's racist or not. It's about the perception of the racists and whether they feel the president turns a blind eye to their activities or supports their activities. And that's the perception they're getting. He needs to include all forms of extremism in his Countering Violent Extremist program. Don't pull back the grant funding from those very few organizations like Life After Hate that were trying to de-radicalize white supremacists. Now we have virtually no one with the funding to counter white terrorism. It's all focused on foreign terrorism and Muslims.
And let me just bring in now a recent Washington Post ABC News poll which said 91% of African Americans, 81% of Hispanics and 75% of women thought the state of race relations today in the United States was the worst they'd ever known. I mean, this is appalling, isn't it? So many years after civil rights.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's lied dormant for many years and people just really didn't focus their attention on it until you start seeing these large rallies of white supremacists carrying torches.
You keep saying, how many large rallies have you seen of white supremacists carrying torches?
Well, recently we've had a few, but prior to that, I would say
how many Antifa have you seen? How many Black Lives Matter groups have you seen who have caused all kinds of havoc?
But what we can agree on, I'm sure, is the fact that President Trump, with his tweets and with his general interventions, is that he's almost normalizing violence. I mean, the golf ball in the back of Hillary Clinton, wrestling down with a member of the media. It's all a bit violent, isn't it?
I don't think that he is. You're saying that he is promoting violence? I don't believe that at all.
Normalizing.
No, I don't even think normalizing. No, if anything, anyone is normalizing the violence, I think it's the police who've been told to stand down in Berkeley and other places where they should not have. They should have basically interacted immediately to stop what was happening immediately. So I blame those people, those sheriffs, and those people in place there. I think that the left. I think the media who feeds into this whole thing, I mean, they play a big part of it because there's so many stations, left stations on that for people to view, and that's all they play 24/7. They keep running it over and over again.
I'm afraid I have to end it there. Thank you all very much indeed. Day Gardner, Daryl Johnson, and Corey Saylor. Thank you all very much indeed for a really interesting conversation.
Thank you so much.
And as ever, thank you for watching the programme. Remember, you can see it again anytime you like. You can go to the website aljazeera.com. You can also go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. We're also on Twitter at AJ Inside Story. I'm at Martine Dennis. So do give us a tweet and let us know what you think. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on this special programme from Washington, D.C.